Hey everybody, welcome to another M365.video SharePoint short. I'm David Warner. Today we're going to continue talking about optimized package bundling, specifically on how to customize our JavaScript chunk names. So in this part 1 video, we're going to cover the following topics. What exactly is a JavaScript chunk? We're going to take a look at an overview of SPFx package bundling, by default and optimized package bundling. Then we're going to see a demo of how we can customize those chunk names and examine the benefits. So let's start out with what exactly is a JavaScript chunk. Well, if you're a big movie fan like I am and you hear the word chunk, you may be instantly thinking of the Truffle Shuffle and Chunk from the Goonies. And while I'm always willing to talk about 80s movies, specifically the Goonies, this time we're talking about JavaScript chunks, specifically the JavaScript file or files that are created when you package up and bundle your SharePoint Framework solution. So let's take a moment and briefly review the difference between default package bundling and optimized dynamic package bundling. Now, by default, when you package up a SharePoint Framework solution using gulp bundle and gulp package solution, all of your functionality is bundled into a single JavaScript file. And this JavaScript file may include functionality such as jQuery or PnP.js that may not be needed immediately upon the page load. It may not be necessary to use one of those libraries until a button has been clicked. And so delaying the importation of those libraries until, for example, the button has been clicked would be very useful. That's where optimized dynamic package bundling comes in. Optimized dynamic package bundling allows us to split that functionality, for example, the jQuery library, into multiple JS files and then load them at the needed time. For example, when the button has been clicked. This will benefit us in reducing the initial load of your solution on the page. We can see this example in the screenshot snippet in the slide. We've separated out jQuery into a separate file. These separate files that are created by dynamically packaging our bundles are called chunks. Although these separate files are oddly named, and they're not the most easy to read. Imagine if you had included multiple libraries, such as jQuery, PnP.js, and Moment.js. And if we dynamically bundled all three of them, they would each receive a unique numeric name like we see there in the screenshot, which would make it very hard to debug and understand which file represented which library. This is exactly where a Webpack feature called Webpack Chunk Name allows us to customize the name of those JavaScript bundles. So let's jump over into VS Code and look at a demo of how we can customize those chunk names. We'll begin by looking at the default chunk names created when you take advantage of the dynamic bundling process. We'll then look at how to modify that importation to use custom chunk names. Now, this demo is not going to show how to create the dynamic bundling importation process from scratch. I do cover that in another video. On the optimized dynamic package bundling slide that we looked at a few moments ago, there's a URL to a video that I had created that shows exactly how to set up your solution to take advantage of the dynamic bundling process. Let's start out by looking at the end result of what we're trying to accomplish. I've created a simple out-of-the-box web part and modified it to include a call to action button. We see here on the Load Async Bundles and Display Current Date button, what's happening is behind the scenes, it's going to import the jQuery and the Moment.js libraries. What we'll see in the code in a moment is that they've both been dynamically bundled to be separate JavaScript chunks. Now within VS Code, let's take a look at how we've set up our web part. The first thing to note is I've created separate files where I do the importation of each individual library. Here in the import jQuery.ts file, I've imported it, and then I return it when the return jQuery method is executed. Now, you don't have to set up separate files. I just like the organizational structure of having them each in their own file. So let's go ahead and close those and look at our web part TypeScript file. In the two highlighted functions we see here, import jQuery and import Moment, is where we're taking advantage of the optimized dynamic bundling, creating async await functions. We then created a load async bundles function, which calls the async await functions that are responsible for the dynamic bundling of our libraries. This load async bundles function is called by the event listener, which is attached to the button we showed in our web part that is called load async bundles and display current date. Essentially, what's going to happen is we're going to utilize jQuery and Moment to replace our subtitle HTML content located right here with the current date time. And we're using both moment and jQuery to make that happen. But the bundles for moment and jQuery are not going to be loaded until the button is pushed. In the browser, we can see that our web part has been loaded as we would expect it to look. So let's go ahead and open up our developer toolbar, and we'll want to make sure we're on the network tab. Now this is going to allow us to see the files imported once we click the button. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll hover and click, and we can see down here now our bundles have been asynchronously loaded on the page. The challenge though is which is which. Which of those files is jQuery and which is moment? Unless we were to create some sort of guide that references which of those file names are actually representative of jQuery or moment, it's virtually impossible to know which is which when we go to debug. And then telemetry for reporting, forget about it. That's even worse. So this is where controlling the name of those JavaScript chunk files can become invaluable. So now let's jump back into the code and see the simple tweak we need to make that will adjust those file names. So now that we're back in VS Code, to take advantage of the custom naming that can be applied to our JS chunk bundles, we're going to make a modification to each of the async await functions for importing both jQuery and moment. The way we accomplish this is using a Webpack feature called a magic comment. And while totally covering all of the magic comments that are available is an entirely another video, what we're going to focus on is the Webpack chunk name magic comment. It literally is just a comment that you include in your await import call. You put it inside of the import method, as we'll do here, and it is just simply a comment that says Webpack chunk name, and then inside of its property, we're actually able to define what the file name should include. In this case, we're saying that our chunk name should include wd import jQuery. So let's go ahead and include a custom chunk name for moment as well, and save. Now let's jump back into the browser and see what the practical changes are that occurred to our chunk names when they're asynchronously loaded by clicking our button. All right, now we're back in the browser and we refreshed our web part now that we've included the web part chunk name magic comment. So let's go ahead and open up our dev toolbar. We'll want to make sure we're on our network tab so that we can see our bundles asynchronously imported once we click the button. So let's go ahead and click our button. We see that it's successful because we see our date and time displayed in the web part, and we can see that our bundles have been imported down here. Now, instead of that nonsensical numeric value, we can see that it includes our chunk name, wd import jQuery and wd import moment. Now you may be wondering why it created two different chunks for each library. That's simply because I chose to create that separate TypeScript file in our solution for each library. So let's review the benefits of taking advantage of custom JS chunk names. First, we have improved debugging. We're able to see which chunks are being loaded based on the custom name and know exactly what each chunk represents. This will also help us in our telemetry if we're doing any reporting on what's being utilized based on the file names. We'll know exactly which each file name represents, again, just like we were with debugging. And this is totally supported in library components. I've showed in other videos how to take advantage of dynamic bundling within your library component. Take advantage of it there too. I hope you've enjoyed this video on how to customize your JS chunk names. Here are some useful links on dynamic bundling. Thanks again for watching, and be sure to subscribe in YouTube to get alerts for all my future videos.